All right, Asher, can you see my screen? All right, perfect. So we're gonna record this because it's gonna go up on the YouTube. No worries, I'll definitely be trimming it. Tonight we're gonna look at chapter 2, being also true today. Of course, we're looking at modern authors this week in our introduction to also true class. This book again is by Matthias Nordvig, PhD. He co-hosts the Nordic mythology podcast and is a very studied individual. Very, very good resource for us to use as we take a dive into the beginnings of Alsatru, kind of like an introductory course to understanding Alsatru and kind of getting a little bit more knowledge and perspective on what it means to be an Alsatruar in the 21st century. Tonight, we're going to be looking at the spirits. And we're going to start off with just kind of some key points on belief. So belief in Alsatru is kind of different than how other world religions define belief. Alsatru can easily be defined by, the works that you do, the intent that you have, and of course, the values that you hold when you read the written text or when you hear the stories of the gods and the heroes. So we, as Alsatruar, have different ways of going about this. Sometimes that belief is expressed through action. Sometimes that belief is expressed through ritual. All of it is in mind with an ethical take on the world that we exist in today. And a lot of that is influenced by what's referred to as foreign seether or ancient custom. So it's an amalgamation, one can say, of different perspectives on what you feel is right, if that makes sense. As humans, we know that the gods are fallible through the stories, so it's understood that we as humans as well are also fallible. This understanding of the nature of the gods doesn't necessarily give us a free pass, more than it highlights the default state or default origin of nature of the gods, which is the right way, right? We're looking at some heavy, strong influences of a code of conduct, some ethics, morals, morality. All of these things play into what it means to be a quote unquote good Alsatruar. That looking at it from that perspective, it can line up with different world religions. So we're going to talk tonight about what makes us different than other world religions, and that would be our gods. Now, when we look into the spiritual entities and the deities within Norse heathenism or Alsatru, we have to start with the Nornir. So the Nornir or the Norns are significant to Alsatru as the weavers of fate and luck. Say, what does this mean? So in the ancient stories, we can understand that the world and humans are fated. So some of these stories are actually, some of these stories actually feature the Nornir. And these are three female or feminine spirits of fate. They're mentioned by Snorri Sturluson and as well as in the Voluspa. Their names are Orther, Verdandi, and Skoll. They live underneath the well called Ortherbrunner at the foot of Yggdrasil. This is the tree, of course, the world tree that stands in the middle of the world and represents the cosmos. Of course, we've gone through a little bit of the written stories, and the received wisdom, whatever you want to call it. We know that an eagle sits in the crown of the tree, a serpent lies among the roots. Time flows like water through the tree. The crown drips dew and rain, which flows over the world's soil and collects in the well. So the three Nornir control the fate of humans in the world. The three Nornir represent the past, present, and future. It's believed in Alsatru that individuals are fated from the day that they're born. Concepts like Gipta, Gefu, and Haminya are three very important words in Alsatru. Gipta is that which has been given to you from birth, while Gefu is your personal ability. Your Haminya is the total sum of all that you have, what you make of it, and what the world bestows on you. That last word comes from the word hammer, which means body shroud. So it has to do with your appearance, how you look to others, like literally your person. Another thing that, so these three concepts are understood as being woven into our fate by the Norns. Another concept that's extremely important to understand is Orlog. That word means ancient law, and it describes the confluence of events that preceded your Giptia, which is like your birth, like the gifts that were given to you at your birth. So every person is born with the Gipta, but also has that spark of Orlog within them. You received it in the creation of the world. So what we're referencing here are the Vor Sunir, which are the sons of Vor, and those are the gods Odin, Vili, and Ve. Sometimes they're called Odin, Holnir, and Lothar, or Odin, Holnir, and Loki. Voluspa tells us a little bit about what happened there. They found Ask and Embla on the land, powerless and without Orlog, or that spark of life. They had no spirit, no mind, no color, nor the gifts of life. Odin gave spirit, Holnir gave mind, and Lothar or Loki gave color and the gifts of life. So in comparison to Gipta, Orlog is that gift of life that came from the gods. All of, the Orlog, Gipta, and Gofu are the abilities that you harness yourself. And when you bring those concepts together, they combine to become your Haminya, which is the way that you carry yourself in life. Your Haminya can be defined as the sum of all of the components of you as an existing being. So when we talk about this, sometimes what people like to, there's basically two different ways to look at this. So there's those that believe that fate, what the Norns weave, is kind of set in stone. And then others feel that fate has kind of a general direction, but you can kind of modify your journey as you go through life. You can take your fate in your hands and you can shape and mold your actions. If we look on the actual practice of Alsatru, we can understand quite easily that neither one of these concepts is necessarily right or wrong, right? Because yes, you are going to have those things, those variables that are set in your lifetime. All of the different variables that you can and can't account for will bring you to those key markers, those rune stones, those guiding stones in your life. And there's not much you can do about those, but I feel like in between those keystones, yes, you absolutely can change the course of your life. And then, hey, if you want to feel like those keystones are movable, if you work hard enough at it, it's not necessarily wrong to say that you can shift those keystones either in your favor or in your detriment, or completely erase them. Not necessarily a wrong way to think about it. There's not a lot that can be said that is right or wrong. But what thoughts do we have about these concepts? Gifta, Gofa, Orlog, Hamingya. Any thoughts on these? And if not, no worries, no worries. It's more of an informational class, but yes, if you have something on your mind, please bring it up. If you don't want to like come off mute, that's totally fine too. You can drop it in the chat. It's not gonna hurt my feelings.
Which of these things do you feel would fall more under like what we nowadays call like karma? Is there one that seems like more equivalent to that?
More equivalent to what now?
Karma.
Karma.
The concept of karma. Mm-hmm.
The concept of karma. That's an interesting perspective. So I think, let me see, let me take a peek here. So karma, to my understanding, there is a will of karma and there is a will of dharma, if I'm understanding the concept correctly. Karma is, how to define it. If you know more about it, correct me, please, because I'm not extremely familiar, but I do know that karma is kind of the yin, would be kind of a yang type deal, where it's not necessarily bad karma, but karma is kind of the what you receive from good actions, dharma, what you receive from bad actions. If I'm wrong, correct me, please.
So would that be more like the sorry if I pronounced it wrong, Hamingya or log?
I believe that would actually be closer to another concept that we're going to talk about tonight when we talk about the afterlife, which would be, it's kind of hard because I know that karma directly affects your Atman or your soul. And the Norse didn't really have a concept of soul in the way that other world religions did. Not saying that it wasn't ever talked about or that we don't have a concept for it. But I think that when we talk about Alsatru, I don't know if there is necessarily like things that you can do to kind of rack up bad or rack up good. Alsatru takes more of a stance on immediate consequence, right? Like what you do has immediate impact on your surroundings. It's a very here and now faith, right? But that's not to say that they don't have a concept of some type of conscience or things that can weigh on you. And that is going to be wrapped up in, or it's going to be most closely wrapped up in the idea of the Hugger, which we definitely will be talking about. So when we talk about Hamingya or your hammer, that goes hand in hand with your Hugger, which is your mind. So you have a mind and a body shroud. And everything within Norse mythology has a Hugger, even animals and natural things like trees, rocks, and rivers. So everything has a Hugger, everything has a hammer. And there's more to that. getting a little ahead of me, but yes, we will talk about that. And I think more closely aligns with your Huger. What else we got? Okay. So I tried to capture a lot of the gods. There's a couple of gods that we're going to talk about tonight that have maybe we need to like set the perception on. We're going to start with Olden. Britt asks, is Huger an instrument? Okay. So Huger being an instrument of what, or was that a joke? I don't understand. Somebody help me out.
I'm so sorry. It's a very poorly timed joke from SpongeBob where Patrick asks if everything is an instrument. I'm very sorry. I will refrain from such immaturity. Please.
You're good. You're good. As you guys some of y'all know, I was homeschooled, so some of the social interactions like SpongeBob jokes fly right over my head. No, you're good. That's funny. It's funny. It's funny. So the first god that we're going to talk about tonight is Olden. His alternate names are Odin, Woden, or Wotan. He's a very, very popular god to whom many Alcitriar can relate. We talked a little bit about this earlier on in the week offline, but the popular name of Allfather can be a misguided perception of Odin's actual nature. So we have to kind of be careful. I would recommend caution with not necessarily using that name, because that most certainly is one of Odin's names, but more so use caution with how you interpret that. Because oftentimes with Odin, that can be kind of misguided or a misnomer to call him All-Father in the sense of like this loving fatherly figure who always gives you what you want, like a vending machine, but that's not Odin's original nature, nor does any of the written or oral stories support that perception of Odin. So he is a god of war. He is a god of death, mystery, knowledge, wisdom, runes, magic, balance, greed, and love. He's very, very gray god. He looks out for the good of his people, and he breaks promises. It's kind of one that I would be very, very not cautious building a strong connection with, but you definitely want to use care. He manifests himself as an eagle. Of course, we know thought and memory, his ravens, Hugin and Munin, fly across the world. He does have a darker side to him. His greed that manifests in his two wolves, Geri and Freki. Any thoughts on Odin? All right. Coming up next, we have Frigg, or Frigga, as she is also known. Frigg is Odin's wife and is often thought of like, a queen, for the same reason that Odin is believed to be a kingly all-father, right? So again, just kind of temper your mind around that thought. She is the warden of the secret wisdom of women, and she resides in the marsh halls called Fensalir. So, like very many other feminine entities within Norse mythology, Frigg is known to be tied into directly knowing the fate of most humans. She is one of her names is the All Mother. Like most mothers portrayed within Norse mythology, direct tie-in to fate. And definitely being Odin's wife, Odin being chief of the gods, very equal in stature with Odin. But as individual gods and goddesses, they are not. It's not the case that one needs the other. They both stand on their own, but they make a hell of a partnership, if that makes sense. So she appears in the mist as a swan. She is considered a mother goddess. So all the positive attributes would not be a misnomer for Frigg. All the positive attributes of motherhood would definitely not be a misnomer for her. And many heathen women look to her for guidance in matters like child care and raising up a family. So definitely someone to entreat on for matters like that. Any thoughts on Frigg? Pretty straightforward stuff. And hopefully what you're seeing, like hopefully you're seeing through these gods a connection to real life, either principles, values, or forces of nature. That's a very important note for later on. Thor, also pronounced Thor or Tor, is probably the most popular of the Norse gods. His hammer pendants were incredibly popular during the Viking Age. Another reason for him being like the most popular or one of the most popular Norse gods is within that same time period, you can find runic inscriptions with the words Thor Uiki or Thor Hallow used as a protection spell. He's a god of strength, power, protection, masculinity, and a warden of fertility and safety from illness. He's probably one of the least misunderstood gods in the Norse pantheon. And funny enough, the way that modern heathens see Thor and the way in which they relate to him today is probably not that far from how he was seen by the ancient heathens. So a lot of his attributes, his ability, his temperament, how we venerate or worship Thor, what he stands for, basically any kind of interaction that we as modern heathens have with Thor today is probably not too far from how the ancients venerated and worshiped him as well, and perceived him. So very, very cool. I like that. That's really, really cool. So it's one that culturally hasn't morphed too hard over the centuries, which is that's kind of a really, really cool thing for me. And I know that's very exciting for other people. Definitely a good key mark of something that we can kind of ground ourselves in and feel good about. But any other thoughts or perceptions or knowledge about Thor that anyone wants to share? Okay. All right. So next up we have Sif. Sif is often worshipped as a fertility goddess. she has control over the growth cycle of plants. And of course, we know that Sif is married to Thor. So in the way that Odin and Frigg are representative of a really good partnership where they stand on their own, such is the case with Sif and Thor. Sif is one that represents the crops. Her husband god Thor, the thunder god in charge of the summer rains, represents the fertility force that makes her ripen. So being rooted in agriculture as a religion, Alsatru being, or the origin of Alsatru being a farmer's religion, this is a very potent image for carrying on agricultural traditions, and even ones that, you know, city dwelling Alsatruar can relate to. So it's not so odd or not so far-fetched that even people that aren't farmers, they can have a relatability to this image and to this understanding of one of the really important things that exist in other world religions, but also is in existence in Alsatru, which is a sacred balance. Summer rain, fertility, ripening, reaping those crops. You know, it's a lot of things in Alsatru are very cyclical and balanced, which establishes it as a very grounded and strong religion. Any thoughts about Sif? All right. Moving on, we have Balder. Balder is the son of Frigg, the tragic son of Frigg, who dies by the hand of his brother, tricked by Loki. Balder, the thing with Balder is that in the late 19th century, scholars argued that he was a sun god or a Christ-like figure. We know that neither of these perceptions are correct, because we do have the goddess Sol, who is a feminine goddess, right? And her name literally means sun. So Balder is not the sun god. His story, Balder's influence on Norse mythology is much, much older than Christianity's influence on Northern Europe. His story has very little to do with the idea of a god that suffers for our sins. However, if you read Snorri's Edda, it's not completely unwarranted to perceive Balder this way. As we talked about offline, a lot of the Edda from Snorri is represented as misunderstood Christianity. So Balder's story and perceiving him to be either a sun god or a Christ-like figure, more so on the Christ-like figure side of that, it has more precedence with Snorri's Edda, since Snorri presented it as misunderstood Christianity. So within Snorri's Edda, we can see that he presents Odin like the Christian Yahweh, like Father God, and represented Balder as like the Christ figure. And then there's another god that we're going to talk about next, that also gained some influence from Snorri's Edda. And we've got to set some things straight there. But historically, for the things that are written about Balder, he's the god of male prowess. He represents masculine beauty. He's the warden of young men who aspire to do great things. So Balder represents that young masculine energy, the example of a strong young man to be, definitely different than being perceived as a sun god or a Christ-like god. Much, much different than that. Any thoughts about the tragic son of Frigg, Balder. Okie dokies. Okay, so probably one of the most controversial gods we'll talk about tonight, Loki. What can we say about Loki? So Loki is probably one of the most misunderstood, one of the most misrepresented, and one of the most misinterpreted members of the gods. How people perceive him today has been impacted by Christianity, specifically Snorri's Edda, and just kind of, and I don't say this in a very judgmental way, or I guess I'm trying to say this in the least judgmental way possible. But a lot of these misconceptions about the gods come from the fact that in North America, a lot of Asa Terrar have converted over from Christianity. So the kind of seeking comfort and relatability, they make an attempt at relating the Norse gods to Christianity. So it's actually innately in our North American perception to kind of want to tie those things together, when in reality, especially with Loki, it's not really a good idea, because throughout history, or throughout the last, I don't know, 2,500 years or so, Loki's been more connected to figures like Judas Iscariot or even Satan. That's not really the case with Loki. Loki is a representation of wild feral energy. Definitely not a god that you can kind of keep on a leash. Not that you would keep any of the gods on a leash, but if you're going to try and do that, Loki would be the least successful one to do that with. Also his son Fenrir, definitely not an entity that you'd want to keep on a leash, but here we are. So the backstory to Loki. Again, Snorri interprets Norse mythology as misunderstood Christianity. So a lot of kind of whitewashing there with Loki. Loki belongs to the very common groups of gods across world religion who function as tricksters. They create problems for the other gods, sometimes really devastating problems, but they always have like this creative element to their mischief. They're the reason that inventions and useful tools are developed. So a couple of other examples of this trickster god type would be Prometheus, who brought fire to the humans by stealing it from Zeus. So similarly, Loki brought the hammer Mjolnir to Thor, the spear to Odin, the ship to Frey and Nord, and he also invented the fishing net. Unfortunately, the trend applies not to specifically Norse heathenism. It's not targeted. It's been painted with a very wide brush. So some examples of misconceptions would be the Native American trickster god Coyote being turned into a fearsome devil by Christian missionaries. The same happened with Ishu and the Yoruba tradition in West Africa. Neither of these gods or neither of these representations are devilish in nature. But when you put them into a religion that sets strong boundaries between good and bad, they become negative figures, which is not really the quote unquote right way to interpret them. The demonization of Loki began about 1,000 years ago when Christianity spread to the north. This creative and innovative fire god was turned into a dangerous devil. People worship Loki in different ways. I do know that he enjoys a little rum and salt. So that's part of whenever I do a bloat, I always make sure that I spare some rum and salt for Loki. I typically interpret him as a trickster god, giving and taking, sometimes creating chaos in order to show a way out. So he's not necessarily benevolent, but he's also not necessarily wholly negative, if that makes sense. So with that, we have several other deities. We have the likes of Freya, who's very popular among Alsachurar. She represents not only female sexual energy, but also female aggression and force. So her name actually means lady, and she's often represented as a beautiful woman. She's a warden of special kinds of ritual magic called Sather. In mythology, she can appear as a hawk, a falcon, or a cat. And then to circle back around, I'll have to double check that, Asra, with Loki, the doer of good and the doer of evil. I'll have to circle back around and see if I can find that somewhere. That's it. It's very it's very on character for Loki, for sure. But I'll notate that and I'll see if I can find it. Of course, so again, Freya can appear as a hawk, a falcon, or a cat. We have Freyr, who's Freya's brother. So he's kind of the masculine complement to Freya's female sexuality. So Freyr is traditionally represented as a man. He's associated with the boar and the horse. He's definitely tied into agriculture as well. Idun, the youth goddess responsible for eternal return. She manifests in the cycle of the year, from spring to winter. So it's she represents the cycle of life in a cosmic sense. So Idun means eternal one. So she's youth and a renewal force for humans, the seasons, and the world itself. We have Skadi, who is raw female energy. She's a ski goddess, huntress associated with wolves. She rules the woods and mountains and is a good friend to any person who enjoys the deep woods and tall mountains. We have Tur, or Tyr. Tyr is a god of war. He sacrifices his hand to the wolf Fenrir for the good of his community, like any proper warrior would. He represents the greatest sacrifice a warrior can make for their community, as well as values such as honor, fealty, and courage. We have Air, the goddess of healing and medicine. Many modern Alsachurar worship her for good health and healing. We have, of course, Hel, the goddess of the realm of the dead, called Nifl or Niflheim. She welcomes all the dead there and cares for them. She's also a powerful goddess for Sather magic. Similarly to Loki, Hel is kind of demonized, wrongfully so in most cases. But it's funny enough that they are related. But yes, some Alsachurar are not as comfortable worshiping Hel, but there are many who are. We have Nord. He's Freyr and Freya's father, the god of ships and the bounties of sea. Many sailors trust in Njord to help them on their ocean journeys. We have Jorth, who's the goddess of earth and Thor's mother. So many Alsachurar see her as the Norse representation of a Mother Earth goddess. And of course, we have Sol and Mani, her sister and brother. Sol, sometimes also called Suna, is the goddess of the sun. Her brother Mani is the god of the moon. Many Alsachurar hold them very dear and worship them in different ways. So again, we've got different concepts. We're going to go over a few other entities within Norse mythology, but the question still remains to be answered. Highly debatable, highly argued over, but not necessarily right or wrong. Different perceptions. But are the gods archetypes or examples, ideologies, or did they exist in corporeal form or in real life? So some heathens certainly think that the gods exist in this corporeal frame, and they necessarily would not be wrong to perceive the gods so. Some see the gods in crowds of humans on the street, on buses, in the mountains and trees, in the lakes, the oceans, the sky, forces of nature. And other heathens see the gods as archetypes of emotion and aspects of the human condition, which exist within us but not outside of us. This idea comes from the Swiss psychologist Carl Gustav Jung. Carl Jung, who lived from 1875 to 1961. He used Norse mythology to write about the shared subconscious processes in the human brain. So some Asatruar see Jung as somewhat of a heathen philosopher who proposed a way of believing in the gods in the modern world. So however you believe, whether you believe that they are more psychological or whether you believe they're more corporeal, again, not necessarily a right or a wrong answer, but most certainly we can gather around the concepts, values, emotions, and actions that each of the gods represent. There's different ways of expressing a close relationship to a god. Full trui is a Norse word that means encompassing dedication. So in Rafnkel's saga Freyskildi, the chieftain Rafnkel, and I apologize if I'm mispronouncing that. This chieftain is the full trui of the god Freyr. So he builds a temple in honor of Freyr alone. He dedicates his horse to Freyr as well, calling it Freyfaxi or Freyr's mane. As such, it's a good example of how ancient heathens could have a close relationship to gods individually. So unlike most Christian faiths or other world religions, if you're looking for an alternative to calling someone or venerating them from a perspective of saint or what's the other Catholic word for it? Somebody help me out here.
Oh, okay.
Trying to think. There's another word for it. I'm trying to think. There you have your saints.
I didn't know if they see me or hear me.
Hey, I can hear you. I can hear you, Cliff. Welcome.
Oh, okay. Hey. Oh, okay, guys. Thanks. Sorry.
But anyways, yeah. So some of the other religions may have saints that they venerate individually. So the Norse equivalent of that, or Norse adjacent of that, would be full trui, which means you're completely and wholly dedicated to one of the gods. Not necessarily right or wrong, just a different way of practice. And there's another, it's less common, but there's another way of having a personal relationship to a deity by cultivating a connection that's called being a god's Ulfvinner. Ulfvinner means loving friend and signifies that a person has a dear and close relationship to a certain god who's seen as their friend. So you might be the Ostvinner of Thor, for instance, if you have a close relationship to him. But again, it's a pantheon, so don't refrain from worshiping the other gods for the sake of having a close personal relationship with one. That may be, you just may feel a stronger personal connection to one god over the many. But again, it doesn't make it right or wrong, just a different way of expressing belief. Any thoughts so far? Okay, well, let's take a look at the different entities that go beyond the gods. Of course, we have ancestor worship. That's incredibly important to many heathens. So specifically in Scandinavia, the ancestors are evident within the landscape. North America, many Alcatraz worship ancestors because it ties them back to Scandinavia for that heritage connection. Of course, Nordic and Germanic tribes migrated across Europe in ancient times. Folks from Northern Europe have migrated to other parts of the world during modern times. So you kind of get this amalgamation or mishmash of people all across the world with Germanic and Scandinavian heritage. Of course, we know that you don't have to have that heritage to practice Alcatraz, to be a heathen or to worship your ancestors. Okay, it's just one piece of the whole for some people. But you know, it's natural for humans to care about their ancestors and want to feel that connection. So many heathens communicate with their ancestors in ritual and forge strong bonds with their ancient relatives as they continue to protect and guide us. And of course, Alcatraz is in many ways an animist tradition. So you have different spirits that exist within this pantheon. So you have the Alfar or the elves. The fertility spirits is what they're normally associated with. You have the Dis, which is a common word for female fate spirit or a most ancient mother. You have the Dwerger. Those are minor demonic spirits that live in the ground. And of course, you have many different local spirits that are just as important for heathens as the gods themselves. So when we're talking about the Alfar, the plural form of that would be holder. They're spirits of a local site. So they live in rocks, trees, mounds, other features of the landscapes. They protect the land. It's always a good idea to stay on good terms with the Alfar. In the folklore, they're responsible for pushing people off cliffs or harming those who cross them. So good terms with the Alfar. They can be appeased with libations. So you pour out mead or beer for them. Alcatraz in Scandinavia have a tradition of giving the last part of their mead in the ceremony to the land vater. Many in Scandinavia still believe in the existence of these beings, even if they're not heathens. So very strong cultural connection with the Alfar, the Vatir, and the land Vatir. And of course, we've talked a little bit about the Disir. They're protective spirits of your family. So it's kind of I want to be careful with going too far with this because it can be taken the wrong way. But everyone has a Disir, which can be perceived as kind of like a guardian angel type, but don't tie that in too hard. But in North America, we can kind of rationalize it that way. Your Disir is your most ancient mother, and she wishes you the best of luck. So you definitely want to stay on good terms with your Disir, or the many Disir that may encompass you and kind of watch over you in that sense. Every house has a Nissa, a Tomta, Gardvord, or Tunkal. They're called different things across Scandinavia. They're the same kind of being no matter what their name is. They're a protective spirit of your house. So caring for the Nissa is one of the most enduring traditions in Scandinavia. Again, even modern non-heathens in Scandinavia believe in the Nissa. So some places you put a bowl of porridge out for the Nissa on Yule Eve. Other places you might have to make a plate for them and keep an empty seat, an empty bed during Yule. Many heathens today give the Nissa offerings on a regular basis to keep the peace in their house. We've got the Dwerger as well. So in ancient times, these entities were believed to be responsible for illness. They're demons in the ground who come up at night and bite the fingers of children. So some heathens still practice magic to keep them away. They live in rocks and can sometimes trick people into following them into their rock, never to be seen again. So definitely want to remain cautious around the Dwergar. Is one of the demons within Norse mythology. You have the Skolgsrol as well. That's a demon that inhabits the woods and steals people's hugr, or their mind, by tricking them into telling them their name. So one example is the Elipika, who's a beautiful woman who greets travelers on the road at night. When they embrace her, they realize that in fact she's a tree demon who takes them into water and drowns them. Noken is as well another one of those spirits of the water who will often make a bargain with musicians. He takes your hugr in exchange for your musical talents. The Salfolk are a special kind of people who live in the ocean in the guise of seals. They're similar to Haffolk, the spirits of the drowned sailors. Treat them with respect and care for them, because the Haffolk will ask you for help and you should give it to them. That will ensure your safe passage. The Sailfolk, on the other hand, should be left alone unless they come to you. And again, last but certainly not least, we have the Draugr, which are the spirits of those who died gruesome and violent deaths. They're lingering ghosts who haunt the places where they died. Any thoughts on these entities past the gods in Ausatru?
Well, I have a guardian frog in front of my porch, which I invite. I guess it's like a golem in a way, but does that make sense? Is that kind of a Nessie?
I believe so. Yeah, that makes perfect sense.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. Oh, and Azra Lin also says our Husvatir Nissa, and I believe that would also make sense for the mythology. Yeah, because a Husvatir would literally mean spirit of the house. So, or white of the house, however you want to translate it. But, a spirit that lives in your home, kind of takes care of things around the house, make sure there's peace in the home. Yeah, definitely. Golems, Husvatir, Nissa, they all pretty much mean the same thing. Yeah. Any other thoughts? Okay, so we're going to move on to our last piece of the night. A source of anxiety for some, not so much others. But we're going to be talking about the afterlife. So, the ancient heathens believed in an afterlife that was quite literally the same as the life that they had lived. And that's apparent from the Viking Age graves. People were buried with all kinds of items and goods, including horses, dogs, slaves, weapons, precious items like gold jewelry, etc. And to kind of fragment this a little, just kind of mix things up. Like we talked about earlier, heathens don't really have or believe in a soul in the same way as a Christian or a Muslim would. The old Scandinavian concept of a soul, again, is your hugr, which we've talked about before, means your mind. Everyone, again, has a hugger. Everything in nature has a hugger or a mind, a spirit. If it's easier for you to call it a spirit, I don't think that would necessarily be a misinterpretation. And this goes hand in hand with your hammer, or your body shroud, quite literally a skin. So you can take on another hammer if you have the power to do it. If that meaning if you know the magic, like Sather or Galder, which pertains to that. So your hugger lives inside of you, but it's not uncommon that a person's hugger can appear as their fulgia when they sleep. The fulgia is the projection of a person's individual qualities in animal form. So everyone has a fulgia, an animal that represents them. But when a person comes of age, it's customary to take them on a journey to find their fulgia. And this would be very parallel to something I experienced most recently within Wicca, similarly to a vision quest. So as the Wiccans would have a vision quest, the Norse would have a fulgia, and you would also go on somewhat of a fulgia quest to find what represents you in nature. Now, all of these concepts combine and aren't mutually exclusive in the Norse perception of the afterlife. So within the old stories, we have mention of Hell's underworld, Nifl or Niflheim, Odin's warrior heaven called Valhall. We know that this is kind of somewhat of a misconception with Snorri's very Christian representation in the Edda. The difference being, unlike that version of paradise, where it's meat-filled, booze-fueled warrior party, we know that in all reality, it would be the Einherjar who basically train every single day for Ragnarok. So just kind of temper your perception with that as well. Scholars are aware that Snorri's descriptions of Valhall and Niflheim were almost direct copies of medieval Christian ideas of heaven and hell, very similar to Dante's Divine Comedy. Snorri's main source for representing Valhall as a warrior paradise is the Eddic poem Grimnismal, or Shadowed Face, which we've read through. That's what he's quoting quite heavily, which describes the death realm of warriors figuratively as such a hall, but in fact says the warriors die under the open sky. So most heathens who are aware of this don't give much thought to what kind of place they go to when they die. So you can kind of wrap yourself up in all of the maybes, but a lot of heathens are focused on how they live their life in the here and now. So focusing on your lived life and your legacy is a central part of modern heathen beliefs that resonates directly with what Odin says in stanza 76 to 77 of Havamal, which is Der Frey, der Frender, der Salfer Sama, en Årstir der Aldregi, hem ser Golden Getter, der Frey, der Frender, der Salfer Sama, ekverein at aldrig der, domer dweden hern, which means cattle die, family dies, you die yourself all the same, but praise never dies for those who get a good reputation. Cattle dies, family dies, you yourself will die all the same. I know something that never dies, people's judgment of every dead person. So modern and ancient heathens alike have always been more preoccupied with leaving a good reputation behind rather than worrying about an afterlife, because there's a lot of maybes in the afterlife. Of course, we do have a modern representation of that with the band Ward Runa, which directly quotes that statement from the Havamal. But more, if anything, the extent of the heathen concern with the afterlife would be best represented in the Ward Runa track Helvegen, which says, "Who will sing for me, wrap me in death sleep when I walk the hell road and those steps I walk are cold, so cold." To kind of wrap all of that up, and to kind of clarify misconceptions between, again, that relatability within Christianity and applying that to Norse heathenism. Hel or Niflheim, sometimes folks use the goddess's name to depict the place, not necessarily a wrong thing to do. However, that's H-E-L, not H-E-L-L. So contrary to popular belief, it is not a hot place. It is not a punishment place. As we've read in some of the written received wisdom, it's actually potentially a place where those who did not die in battle gather with their kin, and share a meal over a fire, and a place that can be punishing for some, but isn't designed for such. So, any thoughts on the afterlife? Anything that need be contributed? No, we have an abnormally quiet class tonight. I know folks are trying to get stuff done and out the way, and some of us are on the road. But hopefully this was all really helpful for you guys. I know it was helpful for me to kind of outline some things for myself. Yeah, I suppose if you lived as a warrior and died from sickness, it would be kind of punishing. Yeah, absolutely. It's all about perception for sure. Yeah, so if you guys have anything else to share, now would be the time to do so. Otherwise, thank you all for joining tonight. We're going to be looking over chapter 3 next week. And that, again, is Matthias Nordvig, also true for beginners. Chapter 3 encompasses values. So the value, the code of conduct system within ALSA True that we can best define. But same bat time, same bat channel. Thank you so much for your time, and I'll see you all next week.
Thanks. That was very interesting. Although I came in late.
Indeed.
Great class. Very nice.
Thank you so much.